The first thing you should know about me is that I did not want to be there, in that classroom, at 7 in the morning, listening to a man explain why a stick with a sharp end mattered in an age of plasma rifles and gravity blades. My name is Leora Thane. I am a Valkyrie, and if you are not familiar with my species, just know we stand roughly as tall as most humans, walk on 2 legs the same as they do, have 4 fingers to a hand instead of 5, no tails, no scales, and no hair growing naturally anywhere on our scalps, though some of us grow it out anyway once we stop caring what our elders think. My own skin runs a soft pearl blue, lighter and slightly luminous, and my hair comes in a shade lighter still, pale silver blue, falling long past my jaw. My eyes tend to unsettle humans most, larger and wider set than theirs, elongated, with a narrow vertical bar for a pupil sitting inside a solid silver iris that shifts faintly under changing light, and fine luminescent lines traced beneath the skin at my temples and jaw. My nose is barely a nose at all by human standards, a bridgeless ridge tapering into 2 narrow slits, just alien enough to notice, human enough to still recognize. And on top of all that, we have absolutely no patience for nonsense before breakfast. But there I was, sitting in the 3rd row of the Meridian Combat Academy, a training institute that pulls in cadets from 6 different systems, all of us shoved together to learn how to fight, how to think, and apparently how to appreciate a rusty piece of metal from a planet that only discovered space travel a few centuries ago. No offense to the humans in the room, I promise it gets better. The academy itself sat on a ring station above a gray, unremarkable moon, chosen, according to the recruitment brochures, for its total absence of distractions. What that actually meant was cold hallways, worse coffee, and instructors who genuinely believed that waking us up before dawn built character. My character, at that hour, mostly consisted of resentment. Half the room could not even agree on what counted as breakfast. The Valkyrie ate protein paste, and the humans, from what I could tell, mostly survived on caffeine and complaints, which, honestly, I respected. The class was called Historic Combat Theory, purely, as far as I could tell, to remind us every species used to hit each other with sticks before figuring out lasers. Riveting stuff. My friend Talia Reth sat beside me, another Valkyrie, her skin a lavender blue with a faint iridescent sheen across her cheekbones, her hair a pale frost lavender at medium length in a soft, natural wave. Fine ridge lines ran from each temple back along her scalp, and her neck read longer and more slender than mine. Her eyes were a solid, pale gold that always made her look already annoyed with you, and her nose sat flattened at the bridge, tapering into 2 slits, angled outward rather than straight down like mine. She had the same expression I did, somewhere between boredom and mild physical pain. "If he shows us another rock with a handle," Talia whispered, "I am leaving." "You said that last week," I whispered back. "You did not leave." "I was making a point. You fell asleep." She elbowed me, hard, right in the ribs, and I laughed loud enough that a few heads turned. Up front, our instructor, a tall and lean Ostari named Joran, cleared his throat, and the whole room went quiet, except for the 2 humans in the back row, still whispering about something unrelated to class. The Ostari are not Valkyrie, whatever anyone who has never left their home system might assume. Joran's skin ran a deep slate gray with a cool green undertone, matte, almost like suede. His eyes were a solid teal green, large and oval, tapering downward at the corners, always sizing you up before deciding whether you were worth the effort. Where my nose is a pair of slits and Talia's flares outward, his sat as a narrow ridge down the center of his face, flanked by 2 small vents, no nostrils at all. His ears were small, rounded plates flat against his skull, and a fine ridge ran from his brow back to the nape of his neck, a feature his people wear the way the rest of us wear age. A healed notch marked one ear, and a thin scar crossed the back of one of his 5-fingered hands, leftovers from a life before the lecture hall. Those two humans, by the way, were Logan Reed and Leah Parker. And if you had asked me back then to describe them, I would have said, quiet, forgettable, exactly the kind of soldiers you put in the back so they do not embarrass anyone. Logan was tall for a human, broad through the shoulders, fair-skinned, with dark blonde hair kept short and neat, a short, neatly trimmed beard along his jaw, and steady gray eyes that never seemed to widen at anything. He dressed simply, a fitted shirt and trousers, sleeves rolled to the forearm more often than not, plain boots underneath, nothing about him dressed to impress anyone at 7 in the morning. He had this permanently relaxed look, like nothing in the universe could rattle him, which, frankly, annoyed me. He had a habit of tapping a stylus against his knuckles whenever he was bored, which was often, and he was almost always bored in this particular class. Leah was smaller, fair-skinned as well, with dark chestnut hair worn open and loose around her shoulders, never pulled back no matter how long the lecture ran, and sharp green eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She dressed just as simply as Logan did, a fitted shirt and trousers, practical boots, nothing fussy about any of it. She was always writing something down, always watching everyone else more than she watched the instructor. She had a notebook, an actual paper notebook, which none of the rest of us had ever seen anyone use outside of historical documentaries. Once I asked her why, and she said something about liking the way it felt, which I did not understand then and still do not fully understand now. I did not think much of either of them. Nobody did. 3 months into the semester, and the two humans in our unit had blended so completely into the furniture that I had genuinely forgotten Logan's last name twice. Joran walked to the side of the room, and with a flourish that I am sure he had practiced in a mirror at some point, he pulled the cover off a long display case that had been sitting there since the start of the lesson, teasing us the entire time. "Today," he said in that deep, self-satisfied voice instructors get when they think they are about to blow your mind, "we look at combat as it once was, not weapons of energy, not weapons of light, weapons of iron and steel and stone, carried by soldiers who had nothing else standing between them and death." Inside the case were blades, a dozen of them, from a dozen different worlds, each one stranger than the last. There was a curved thing with 3 separate cutting edges, its handle wrapped in something that looked disturbingly like dried skin, and a hooked weapon that looked like it was meant to gut something twice your size and keep gutting it out of spite. Joran walked us through each one, tapping the glass, giving us a date, an origin, a rough estimate of how many people it had probably killed, which was somehow both fascinating and a little nauseating this early in the morning. Near the end of the case sat a long, straight blade that looked almost embarrassingly plain compared to everything else. "This," Joran said, tapping the glass above it, "is from Earth, a weapon called a Greatsword, human-made, several centuries old by their calendar, and before you ask, yes, it is real steel, not some replica." Talia snorted so loud that half the class turned to look at her. "That is it?" she said. "That is the big finish? A metal stick?" Joran raised an eyebrow, the kind of eyebrow raise that instructors give when they know something you do not. "Cadet Reth," he said, "why do you not come find out how heavy your metal stick actually is?" I want to be clear, I saw this coming from a mile away, and I still enjoyed every second of it. Talia stood up, rolled her shoulders, and walked to the front like she was about to lift a training dummy for warm-up. The case slid open and 2 assistants wheeled the blade out on a stand, laid across 2 supports so it hovered at waist height. Even from my seat I could see the thing was long, easily longer than Talia was tall, wide at the base, tapering only slightly toward the tip, and it had this dull, worn look, the look of something that had actually been used, not something built for a museum shelf. "Grip it here," Joran said, pointing near the base of the handle, "and lift straight up." Talia grabbed it with both hands, planted her feet, and pulled. Nothing happened. I mean that in the most literal way possible. The blade did not move. Talia's face went through 3 stages very quickly. First confidence, then confusion, then a very specific kind of embarrassment reserved for people who insult something in public and then get instantly humbled by it. "It is bolted down," she said, breathing harder than she should have been for lifting a single object. "This is rigged." "It is not bolted down," Joran said, calm as anything. "Try again if you like." She tried again. Both hands, both feet planted, every bit of Valkyrie muscle she had, and the blade lifted maybe an inch off the supports before she had to set it back down, arms shaking, face flushed under that lavender blue skin of hers. She tried a third time out of pure stubbornness, got the same inch, and finally stepped back, glaring at the blade like it had personally insulted her ancestors. "Okay," she said, breathing hard. "That thing is heavier than it looks." "Most things from Earth are," Joran said, and I swear the man was enjoying this far too much. He let the challenge sit in the room, watching us shift uncomfortably in our seats. That particular discomfort of watching someone fail at something in public and knowing you might be asked next. A couple of other cadets did volunteer, or were volunteered by their friends, and each attempt ended the same way: a strained grunt, a few inches of lift, and a slow, defeated retreat back to their seats, muttering about weight distribution and unfair museum props. By the 4th failed attempt, the whole thing had stopped being funny and started being genuinely strange, and nobody in that room could explain why a single piece of metal from a planet without gravity technology was outperforming an entire class of trained soldiers. 4 generations of cadets, Joran said, walking slowly around the blade like it was a prize exhibit, which I suppose at that point it was. 4 generations, and no one in this academy has lifted this weapon cleanly off its stand. Not once. That was when Leah Parker, sitting in the back, leaned over toward Logan Reed and said something none of us could hear clearly, except for the tail end, which was something like, "Go on then." Logan shook his head slightly, the universal gesture of someone trying very hard to avoid attention. But Leah said something else, sharper this time, and half the row around them started looking their way. And that, more than anything Leah actually said, seemed to be what got him moving. He stood up. I remember the sound the room made, this small collective breath, half amusement, half disbelief, because up to that point nobody had really looked twice at the humans in the class. They were quiet, they kept to themselves. And now one of them was walking to the front to try lifting a weapon that had just handed an entire species a very public defeat. "Cadet Reed," Joran said, and I could hear the faint amusement in his voice too, the kind reserved for someone about to watch a very predictable failure. "You would like to try?" "Sure," Logan said, like he was being asked if he wanted a second cup of coffee. He walked up, looked at the blade for a second, longer than Talia had, actually studying it rather than just grabbing it, eyes moving from the grip to the flat of the blade to the way it sat balanced across the supports. Then he crouched slightly, wrapped both hands around the grip in a way that looked different from how everyone else had held it, lower, closer to his body, and adjusted his stance so his feet were wider apart than before, weight settling into his hips rather than staying locked in his shoulders. "That is not how you lift something," Talia muttered from beside me. "He looks like he is about to sit down." I almost laughed. Almost. Logan exhaled, slow and even, and lifted. The blade came up off the stand clean, smooth, no shaking, no strain visible on his face, like he was picking up a bag of groceries rather than a weapon that had just humiliated an entire species. He rotated it slightly, testing the balance, shifted his grip once, and then, almost as an afterthought, spun it in a slow, controlled arc that ended with the tip pointed at the floor and the blade resting easily against his shoulder, like it had been sitting there his whole life. Nobody said anything for a long moment. I want you to understand, in a room full of soldiers, silence is rare. We talk, we joke, We mutter under our breath about instructors and each other, constantly, but for maybe 5 full seconds, that entire classroom did not make a sound. Talia's mouth was hanging open, which, for the record, is not a good look for a Valkyrie. Joran, to his credit, recovered faster than the rest of us. "Cadet Reed," he said, and his voice had lost every trace of that smug, self-satisfied tone from before. "How?" Logan shrugged, actually shrugged, with a several hundred-year-old human weapon resting on his shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. "You are all lifting it wrong," he said. "Excuse me?" Talia said, finding her voice again, sharper now, defensive. "We were lifting it exactly how he told us to." "No offense," Logan said, and I could tell he meant it. There was no smugness in his tone, no gloating, which honestly made it worse. "But you were all trying to lift it like a weight. Straight up, arms only, brute strength. That is not what this blade was built for." "It is a sword," Talia said. "You lift a sword." "Sure," Logan said, "but not like that. Can I explain? Or do you just want to keep being annoyed at me?" I actually laughed out loud at that one, could not help it, and Talia shot me a look that promised retribution later, but she gestured at him to go on anyway, because at that point, honestly, all of us wanted to know. Joran stepped back, actually stepped back, and gestured for Logan to take the floor properly, teacher becoming student for once, which I imagine was not a comfortable feeling for a man who had built his entire class around being the one with the answers. "This blade," Logan said, still holding it with that same easy grip, "was not built to be picked up once and shown off. It was built for a soldier who might have to swing it for an entire day. Real combat, back on Earth, before energy weapons, was not one big impressive lift and done. It was hours, sometimes fighting in armor that weighed as much as another whole person strapped to your back. So the weight in this blade is not random. It is not there to make you struggle. It is there to be moved with your whole body, not just your arms." He shifted his stance again, hips turning slightly, weight rolling through his legs rather than sitting locked in his shoulders. "You were all trying to lift with your arms and your back," he said, "straight up like a weight in a gym. But the weight in this blade is meant to swing through your hips, through your legs, using your whole body as the lever. If you fight like that all day, you are not tiring out one muscle group over and over. You are using your entire body together, so you last longer. That is why it feels impossibly heavy if you try to lift it the wrong way, and why it feels almost natural if you lift it the way it was actually designed to move." "That is still just physics," Talia said, though with noticeably less confidence than her first attempt. "Sure," Logan said, "but it is physics built around a body that had to survive a real fight, not a demonstration. Humans never had shields that could stop a hit for us, never had suits that could take the damage so our bodies did not have to. Every blade we built knowing our own arms and legs were the only things standing between winning and losing. So the weight, the balance, all of it, was shaped by people who had no other option but to get good at moving something like this, or die finding out the hard way." He paused, glancing down at the flat of the blade, watching the dull overhead lights slide across its surface. "There is a reason the grip is worn down exactly where it is," he continued, "and a reason the weight sits closer to the guard than the tip, so you can recover your stance fast enough to block the next hit instead of overcommitting to the first one. None of that is decoration. Every choice on this thing was paid for by somebody who did not survive making the same mistake twice." "There is also the training itself," Logan added, glancing around at the rest of us. "Back home, people who used weapons like this trained for years, sometimes their whole lives, starting as children with wooden versions half this size, before they were ever handed something real. It was passed down, generation after generation, refined every time somebody found a slightly better way to survive with it. By the time someone actually swung one of these in a real fight, their body had probably spent a decade learning how to do it without thinking. That is not something you can fake by being strong. You either have that decade behind you or you do not. So it is not about strength at all, Leah said quietly from the back. Not really a question, more of a statement she wanted the room to hear out loud. Not really, Logan said. It is about knowing exactly how something is supposed to move and moving with it instead of against it. The soldiers who trained with weapons like this did not lift it once and put it down. They carried it, moved with it, fought with it for hours, and their whole bodies remembered how to do that, even after their weapons changed into something else entirely. I think some of that memory just stayed in how we are built, how we move. It is not magic. It is just centuries of nobody else fighting our battles for us. He set the blade back down onto its stand gently. No clang, no drop, just a soft, controlled sound of metal meeting metal, and stepped back like he had not just rewritten every assumption the entire room walked in with that morning. Joran did not say anything for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had none of its earlier performance in it. In 4 years, he said, no cadet has explained that weapon better than the man who just lifted it. Talia was quiet, actually quiet, which for her was rarer than the silence in the room had been a minute earlier. She looked at the blade again, then at Logan, arms still crossed, jaw working like she was chewing on something she did not want to admit out loud. "Show me the grip," she said finally, which from Talia was about as close to an apology as any of us were ever going to get. Logan actually blinked, surprised, then walked her through it, positioning her hands lower on the grip, adjusting her stance the way Joran usually adjusted ours, wider, weight low, hips ready to turn instead of arms ready to strain. Talia tried again, and this time the blade came up, not smoothly, not gracefully, but it came up, clean off the supports, and she held it there for a solid 2 seconds before her arms gave out and she had to set it back down, laughing despite herself. "That is still ridiculous," she said, "but fine, it works." Logan laughed, a real laugh, and even Leah, still sitting with that same sharp, observant look, cracked a small, proud smile, like she had known exactly what was going to happen the entire time and had just been waiting for the rest of us to catch up. As for me, I sat there thinking about how many times I had looked at those two humans and assumed there was nothing particularly special going on. Just two quiet cadets keeping their heads down in the back row. I had judged an entire species by two people who barely said a word in 3 months of class. And it took one very heavy, very old piece of metal to show me exactly how wrong that judgment was. Because here is the thing about humans nobody tells you before you meet one properly. They do not brag about how their ancestors fought with actual metal in their actual hands, with nothing standing between them and whatever was trying to kill them, except their own 2 arms and whatever they were smart enough to build. They just quietly carry that history in how they move, in reflexes shaped by centuries of nobody else fighting their battles for them. And then one day, one of them casually picks up a piece of it like it weighs nothing at all. Talia never brought up the weight of that blade again, at least not seriously, though she spent the rest of the semester finding creative ways to bring up the fact that a human had outlifted her, usually right before asking Logan for tips on grip and stance, which honestly I found far more entertaining than anything Joran ever put in that display case. Joran, to his credit, changed the way he taught the rest of that unit, asking us before every new blade who actually had to use it and why it was shaped the way it was. None of us ever told him it made the class better, because admitting an instructor improved after being shown up by a cadet felt like a step too far for Valkyrie pride. Weeks later, in the mess hall, Talia asked Logan, half joking, half not, whether every human just secretly walked around carrying that much hidden strength behind a completely ordinary-looking face. Logan just smiled, took a bite of whatever unfortunate meal the mess hall was serving that day, and said he had genuinely never thought about it that way, which somehow made the whole thing funnier and more unsettling than if he had simply agreed with her. I still do not fully understand humans. I doubt I ever will, but I know this much now. 3 months of sharing a classroom with 2 of them was apparently not enough to actually see them, and it took one stubborn, ancient, ridiculously heavy piece of earth steel to finally do it for me.